He's here somewhere. Councillor, behave. Right, now we go into, we've done the mayoral proposal, and that has been agreed to go out for consultation, keeping an open mind and noting that Aucklanders are the bellwether of that. And then we now look at some other matters. And I welcome to the table Michael Burns. Is Alistair with you, Michael, or you're on your own? Oh, okay. Sorry, I've got both. It's up to you. Over to you. So, councillors, just for your information, we'll deal with the things on the agenda and then we'll deal with water quality at the end, all right? So, gentlemen, over to you. Thank you.
Kia ora all. So this report considers 6 other items to approve for consultation through the long-term plan. The first 3 of those items relate to assets that may be considered strategic according to our significance and engagement policy. The first 2 items, Bledisloe House and then the properties in Takapuna and Devonport, are considered strategic on the basis of their heritage scheduling. And then the following item, the properties in Wynyard Quarter and Wynyard Point, are considered strategic under our policy, which talks about those waterfront properties. So that's the first 3 items. In order to make any decisions around transfer of ownership or change of control of strategic assets, we need to have provided for that in the LTP. So it's about providing for future decisions. The next 2 items are about updates to policies that we hold. The first is the CCO accountability policy, and the second is our airport shareholding policy. Both of these updates are primarily just updates for changes that have happened, such as the removal of Auckland Council Investments Limited, or the amalgamation of RFA and ATEED. And then the last item is just agreeing at this stage that we will consult on an update to the regional fuel tax scheme and consult on an updated proposal to the government on our regional fuel tax scheme. And that would just be about, not about the overall concept of the scheme, but about the projects which that scheme would fund, given some of the changes such as the funding from through the New Zealand Upgrade Program for Mill Road and Penlink. So that's the items that you're looking at here, and I'm happy to take any questions.
So, councillors, we have talked about this at some length, but in the public arena, if you'd like to ask any questions or make a comment, I invite those from you now. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and apologies, and it may be for Panuku, but could I just be sent a bit, I'm a bit confused what Silo 6 is, and maybe there's no one here to answer that, and I should have asked at the workshop.
Yeah, I'll just ask James from Panuku to come help with this.
Just didn't understand what that sale would be.
Silo 6 is the site around the silos in Wynyard Quarter, so on the west and the eastern sides of the 6-pack.
But the silo will stay.
What's that, sorry?
Is the silo...
So yes, it's subject to the master plan process that the team is working on at the moment, but the intent is that the preferred option for now is that the silos will stay.
Okay, thank you. So that would come back to us then at some later time around what that looks like.
It'll come to the planning committee, yes.
Yep, thank you.
Just check out bullet point 28. It's got the map and everything there. Yeah. Thanks.
I can see what it was, but I didn't understand.
Oh, okay. No, all of it.
Okay.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. So I have a question around the Auckland Airport shareholding policy, 47C. So that's the changes to explicitly provide for council to sell down any shares acquired through the dividend reinvestment plan or other corporate actions such as rights issues. So does this just limit us to that sliver of what we're able to do? Rather than have opportunities if they came up, and people have mentioned it before, that if you really do have the deluge, we would have to change the policy before we could do anything.
Yes, so this proposed policy would limit our shareholding to be no less than the current number of shares, and therefore, so that's all it's providing for and what it will be provided for in the long-term plan, and therefore any proposal that would reduce us below the current number of shares would need to be reconsulted for and provided for through an LTP amendment.
Can you just explain how different this is from the current policy? Seeing we're changing it?
Consulting on changing it.
Well, consulting the proposal. Sorry,
So
Madam Chair.
John Bishop will just join us, he's deeper in this one.
Yeah, thank you through you, Chair. So look, just to back up a step, the problem we have with the current policy is that it's relatively inflexible when Auckland Airport undertakes corporate actions. So, for example, if they were to raise more capital, whether it's in an institutional placement like they did earlier, or, for example, a rights issue, we at the moment don't have the current flexibility to sell those shares without public consultation. So we have to hang on to those shares and therefore take market risk. What we're trying to achieve by this policy is for small arrangements like dividend reinvestment plan. If for some reason we did decide to participate, we would not have to go to a full council meeting to do that. In other situations where there's a corporate action, if it is possible, we would get governing body or finance committee approval. But in a situation where we couldn't and with the opportunity to take action, then we would delegate that down to a smaller group so we can act quickly and potentially sell shares as long as we're not selling existing shares to participate in that corporate action, therefore take advantage of that corporate action. So a good example is a rights issue. If they did a rights issue where you can buy essentially discounted shares in proportion to your holding, we could do that and potentially sell those rights or sell those shares without having to go to public consultation. That's the idea.
That kind of covers off what Councillor Darby brought up earlier in the year, I think last year, when there was opportunity and we weren't able to be nimble enough. What it doesn't cover off for me, and I don't want to put you on the spot and ask you for your expert opinion, but I think the nimbleness, if we had a real, well, I think we've had pretty much of a disaster, but I don't know how we measure the scale of disaster, but what is really a rainy day or a deluge. But I think that's what this doesn't cover for me, is enough flexibility. It's if we had to really access these funds beyond what it says here, we can't do that without going out to a full public consultation. Again, doesn't give us enough. It would take a long time.
Maybe if I can address that. If you did get the deluge that I spoke about in the last session, it wouldn't require that you had to sell them that week, that day, or that month. And what you would have time to do is you'd have time to have a proper meeting of the governing body to talk about the policy. And you would still, I think, have to go out to a form of public consultation, as I understand it, Michael. So that would take time, but it's not a parallel to the situation where there's a sudden share offer and you've got 24 hours to respond. We would have time, and it might take a couple of months, but it would be a sort of a situation like a fourth lockdown where we lost another $1 billion. I don't know where I'd find that other than the deluge, the rainy day fund.
Well, that remains to be seen, whether you really do that.
Well, that's a discussion we can have later. At the moment, we're just, yeah. Right, any other, Councillor Darby?
Thank you, John. And just in terms of that policy, or just before I go to that policy, in terms of our oversight of the port of Auckland, we rely not on a policy, we rely on the MOU. Has there any thought been given to actually having a policy to oversee the management rather than an MOU, which doesn't have a lot of bite to it?
Through you, Chair, you're referring to the port?
Support,
Yeah.
port,
Look-
not airport, yeah.
Look, through you, Chair, I'm not probably in the best position to answer that question. I'm not totally familiar with the MOU.
Does anybody, Chief Financial, do you understand that MOU between us and the port, which interestingly isn't actually signed by the Mayor? I've just realised that, Mr Mayor. It doesn't have your signature on it, and it probably should. Was that socialised fully and a decision made by the elected members of Finance Performance or governing body to agree to that MOU with the port company?
Yeah, we need somebody to answer that for you. I think.
Yeah. Okay, well, look, just going back to this one, and thank you for reviewing it. We did get caught out by not reviewing this when ACIL were put out to pasture. Just one of my questions here is, do we need to identify a key staff member or somebody external that can actually give us advice on such a chunky issue as, a $2.1 billion holding? That's expert equities advice. Are you confident that the wording signals that is required to inform any future decision making?
Yeah, look, through you, just to clarify one point, which keeps coming up. When we go back to that placement by Auckland International Airport, look, we weren't invited to participate. So it's a moot point what the policy said, because we weren't invited to participate. So that's off the table. I think as far as advice and contact points, I mean, it's not in the policy, but the contact point for council is the group CFO in the first instance.
Okay.
And I guess to your point, I'm not sure what further advice we would get as far as strategic advice on holding shares in airports. I'm not sure what that would add.
Okay, and just, we've dropped now below 20%, so we're in a disadvantaged position now. We can never ever climb over 19.99% without launching a full takeover. So we could never get back to that 23% point, could we? Because of not thinking about that at the placement time.
Through you, Chair, look, I'm not an expert on securities law, but I understand you can go over 20% without launching a full takeover. You need to make disclosures, but obviously that would require the investment of scarce capital, which council doesn't have.
Yeah, I thought that's why we actually don't participate in dividend reinvestment plans when we're over 20%, because you actually have to sell down. It's quite an onerous task to go and get clearance from the NZX to not make a full takeover when you're creeping your shareholding. But look, that's probably history, because we are not going to be back in that territory, and that was never ever discussed then. But okay, so just in terms of one of the parts of that policy that I've read, going to the Mayor, Deputy Mayor and Chair of Finance, I think within that, you don't want to get too wordy, but within that, there needs to be an immediate circulation of the recommendation of those three to all the councillors. But that would probably be too wordy to have in a policy.
Look, through you, Chair, I'm sure that would be the general intention. One issue here with the policy is it's very hard to predict all the sorts of corporate actions and things like that which Auckland Airport could undertake, what they might be, what they might look like in the time horizons. So it's very difficult to summarise all the options in one policy. For example, your previous comment about share splits or share consolidations.
That's my only. Look, I'll agree to this. It's a big improvement, and it puts us in a position to being able to treat with any share placement. But I would expect, when the Mayor and Deputy Mayor and you
Chair, treat with something that comes at you quickly that there's always a circulation, because this is a big sum of money.
That goes without saying, I think, councillor, from my perspective, certainly. And remember, this is going out for consultation, and I think actually what we need to do is do something with this policy and bring it back and sort of discuss it with it further. But at this stage, the paper is about the slight amendments to the current policy to go out for consultation. Councillor Cooper.
It's another question around Auckland Unlimited's brief. Part of it says that it's there to manage film facilities. And I don't think that it's our job to be managing film facilities, especially, I mean, we own one. But I think that we've got to start looking at that the private sector can actually do that. I'm not sure that Auckland Unlimited should be managing those facilities that are owned by Panuku.
What's your bullet point number?
Well, it isn't, there's no number because it's in the document 1.21 of Auckland Unlimited and the addendum, it's on page, I think it's 291. And then there's several bullet points on that page. So it's the last part of the page. It does this by undertaking the following activities. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th bullet point, second to last bullet point. It talks about attracting investment, which I support, connecting business to resources to help them grow. But then it says managing specific facilities for sectors such as film. You know, I think that's a little bit, it's actually an anomaly, and I don't think we should be doing that. I think we should be, you know, we've got 18 with leases on these places. We own one, and we've got leases, at least two leases that I know of are 18. We shouldn't be leasing that stuff. We should be enabling the private sector to do that. And so I find it hard to support that. There's people out there that want to buy into these things in the private sector that do it much better. And the film industry are saying they don't like dealing with council, with film facilities, and we need to be having a really hard look at that. I mean, maybe it's too late to take that out now, but I think that we need to have a conversation about whether we should be in that business. We should definitely be attracting and supporting in our processes, but actually managing facilities.
Remember, this is going out for consultation.
Yeah, but it's so in the fine print, Madam Chair, I want to highlight it because I don't think that for most councillors around the table, they're engaged in this. And I am, because one of those film studios is in my ward.
Do we have someone from Panuku here?
Or is Sarah Johnson-Smith online?
Sarah, can you hear us?
Hi, I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Great. Just further to councillor's point, yes, AT do hold leases over some film facilities, but they are also a studio manager of some of those facilities. So that bullet point does reflect current practice. And I suppose the question of whether that was a longer term arrangement would be something the council would need to consider.
Thank you for that. Okay, councillor. I know what you're saying.
So I think we need to have that conversation in the next while, because I don't think most of the public will pick that up, but I think it's a piece of work we need to do to see whether we should be in that business.
Point noted. Okay, any other sorry, councillor Hills.
Apologies, just briefly, Madam Chair. I asked at the workshop, but it doesn't actually mention it in the agenda item. But on To the Strand, will the consultation include the fact that it was a bequest and that income has to go to a community activity?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? No, it needs to be moved. Your Worship, do you want to move this?
Happy to do so, Madam Chair.
And Deputy, do you want a second? Right. I'll put it to the vote then. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. And thanks, Michael. And thank you. Right, now we move on to item 12.